With the scarcity of chartreuse on the market, we should probably have a discussion on how to make your own. And it is actually fairly easy. There are lots of resources for making chartreuse, and they come mostly from old distillation guides and soda fountain manuals and pharmacy journals. And there are actually 24 recipes that I've already collected, and I'm still collecting more. I'll publish all those over on my Patreon page, but they're all very interesting to read. They all have similarities, but then they branch off with different flavor compounds. So we have our core here and then, optional components there, and we'll get into that. But today I'm going to show you a 10 ingredient recipe plus water, sugar, and alcohol. So 13 ingredients in total. There are no special steps to this because it is alcohol based. So green chartreuse is at 55% ABV. So dissolving all of these essential oils is going to be really easy. It's not like making a soda or a flavor syrup because the alcohol will keep everything in solution. Now you can make a non-alcoholic soda or beverage using this. In fact, I have a friend who has a bar in Stratford, Ontario called Relic. And last year I made a chartreuse recipe, this one here, that I'm still working on. And he's been using it as a non-alcoholic beverage on his menu. And if you've looked at the video on how to make a Fernet soda, that's basically how they do it. But today we're focusing on a liqueur. So if you want to know the non-alcoholic stuff, check out how to make an essence video and the Fernet soda video. This has actually been sitting around for a year. That's actually the Fernet essence, just seeing how it ages. So I'll go through all of this, and it's actually fairly easy. Don't let this scare you. But first, let's talk about macerating herbs and spices. Those recipes, and there are a fair amount in here, are all distilled. That's what gives the chartreuse kind of that smooth flavor, is that distillation step. Now maceration tends to pull out of a lot of alkaloids and other bitter compounds. If you use too much, they do tend to be more bitter than actual chartreuse. And they do have different flavors. So I do recommend using essential oils. These are all effectively purified by distillation already. All of these compounds are grass, except for a few that I'm going to talk about that you will find in some of the recipes. You will need 95% alcohol because, at 55% ABV, even when we add the syrup and the water, basically water and sugar, that will dilute this down to that kind of 55 range. So it's definitely an alcoholic beverage today. So let me go through some of these ingredients in this 10 ingredient recipe. So this is a great starting point because this one's actually quite easy and reasonable. One of the recipes says, making chartreuse without distillation is like going to see Hamlet without the lead in the play. And it is kind of true, but you can get something that's close and then you can add other ingredients, and you don't have to redo everything. You can add drops to your finished product and slowly work your way up to build a recipe. It is experimental. So don't feel that this is always going to be something you have to redo all the time. You can just make modifications right in the bottle and see how they work out. And then once you have a recipe, you're golden. So let's talk about ingredients because they are important. Now chartreuse claims to have 130 different ingredients. That's what makes the formula really hard to duplicate. Though with 10 ingredients, we can kind of get in the ballpark, and then with a bunch of other ingredients, if you're good at analyzing aromas, you might be able to get even closer. So the first thing is peppermint. Now this is Japanese peppermint oil. You can get various different types of peppermint oil. Use whichever one works for you, and it's relatively cheap. Next, you will have Angelica. This one is universal, and for most people, this is probably the primary aroma compound in chartreuse, or at least it's thought to be. So you can't really skip the Angelica. Sometimes it calls for Angelica root, and sometimes it calls for the leaf. This recipe just calls for the root, and I have just regular and CO2 extracted. They have slightly different flavor profiles, but your standard Angelica root essential oil will work just fine. Next, we have lemon balm, sometimes called Melissa. This one is fairly expensive, but it does smell great. It's got that kind of lemony smell, a little more herbal. But if you can't find it or you don't want to spend it on it, you can use some lemon oil. It is lemon you'll find as a substitute in some of the recipes, not many. But that may give you kind of that lemony element of it if you don't want to put out the money for lemon balm. Next, we have hyssop. This one's another expensive one, but you're only using a few drops. Like the maximum, to make a gallon of, or 3.8 liters of chartreuse, you're only going to need like 6 drops of this. Same with this. And so it's quite inexpensive, or you can get a lot of chartreuse with just a few bottles. Next, we're going to add cinnamon, and this is relatively universal in all of them. This is the true cinnamon. You can use cassia if you want. It's a little bit harsher, but true cinnamon is usually what they call for. Next, we have mace. Now, mace is pretty common. You can get mace essential oil, but if you already have nutmeg oil, you could probably get away with it. They smell fairly similar, so you can use nutmeg or mace. Both are actually used in this pile of recipes here. And then next is sassafras. Now, sassafras shows up in a few recipes, but it's actually in this recipe. You can't use sassafras. I did a video on it. It really just smells like anise. So you can just actually use anise. This is anisal alcohol, very strong on that flavor. But if you wanted to use something like fennel or aniseed, both will work. Or toscanol, this is the sassafras substitute. This has more of a candy sassafras flavor. If you want something more genuine, go with anisal alcohol and or fennel or aniseed. All will work, and you're only using 3 drops of it, so in a gallon of liqueur. So it's, it's not going to make a big difference if you're not using the exact compounds. Next, we have sandalwood. Now, sandalwood is expensive, but in this recipe and a few others, it does call for it. Sometimes it's called santal in these old recipes, but yes, that is grass, generally recognized as safe, so you can use it. All of these are generally recognized as safe, unless I tell you otherwise. So sassafras oil, not. Toscanol is. Next, we have thyme and lemon thyme. I only have white thyme. So if you're trying to do the lemon thyme, you can do lemon oil with 2 drops of thyme and 2 drops of lemon oil, and that's going to get you in the ballpark. Don't expect to be exactly like this, but the idea is you're going to get close, and then the more you make it, the more you experiment, you're going to get closer and closer and closer. So this is your starting point. Now that is this 10 ingredient formula here, and you would add that to 2,400 mils, so 5 pints of 95% alcohol. 80% or above will do, but they typically called for 95 or deodorized alcohol. And then you will add basically 1 kilo of sugar to that and 840 mils of water to the alcohol, and that's it. You're done. That will get you the starting point for your chartreuse. You're literally putting 37 drops into a gallon of liquid, and that is kind of the flavor profile. If you ever taste green chartreuse straight, like I do here, it's the alcohol, a bit of sugar that are really the flavor. It's got that kind of alcohol burn that people really like, but the flavor is quite mild. And it's not potently bitter, though some people do find it bitter. I probably drank too many bitters over my lifetime, so I find it kind of pleasant. But there are some things you can add to give it some bitterness, and many of the recipes do. So let's talk about the things we can add and modify and are found in other recipes, and 1 or 2 ingredients that I think would make good additions. So the first is wormwood. So absinthe has wormwood in it. I would almost guarantee that chartreuse has some form of wormwood, whether it's mugwort or any of those Genepi bitter herbs would be in it. If you're using wormwood, you have to be very careful. This is going to have thujone in it, and you're only legally allowed to have 10 parts per million or lower. And only in alcoholic beverages. So be careful when using wormwood, but it will add a pleasant bitterness to this. Next is musk. Now, there are many different types of musk. Ambrette seed is probably the one that's easy to find. You can get Ambrette essential oil, and it definitely has a musky, you know, almost like 1970s men's cologne or men's deodorant stick, you know, that kind of classic men's musk smell. I actually prefer this product called Ambrox, and it's grass. You're allowed to use it, very small amounts, below 1 part per million. But it's got that musk smell, but it's more floral and less 1970s. If I were to do anything with this, I'd use Ambrox, but it's really expensive. You have to buy it in like you get 4 mils and it's like $10. It's not super expensive, but it's very usable. Now you can use labdanum. It's got more of a Christmassy spice musk. And then there's also Xtolide. Xtolide? Yeah, Xtolide. This one's more of a classic men's musk. More pleasant than the labdanum. Or no, more pleasant than the Ambrette. So this would be my second choice, and it is grass as well. Now the next one, cardamom. You will find a fair number of recipes include cardamom in it, and you get the essential oil, or you can get these more purified, isolated compounds. So this is cardamom aldehyde, and it's a little more potent, a little bit more expensive, but it's a single note, and it would allow you to adjust your flavor profile in like a very fine way. So if you're finding mixing all these essential oils, which have dozens or hundreds of different compounds in it, and you need to really narrow down something, that's where these isolated compounds really come in handy. And if you watched any of my other videos, you'll know that those are very helpful when you're just trying to fine tune a recipe, so go with them. Next is chamomile. This is found in a lot of bitters. It is, in fact, itself bitter, and it will add that pleasant bitterness, but this one's a mainstay in a lot of bitter recipes, so don't be afraid to use it. You use it in a very small amount, 1 drop in this recipe. Now, most of these that I've mentioned already are in the 1 to 2 drop range for this recipe. So you're not using a lot, you're just using a very small amount. Next, cognac oil. You know, this one's in the 1 to 3 drop range. It's, you know, there's probably a wine brandy base for this. It is France after all. And so you can use cognac oil or green cognac oil. And I recommend the green cognac oil. This is just an ester, sometimes called white cognac oil, but it's the green cognac oil that actually has a oddly green aroma. And, you know, it does have that sweet brandy smell. Basically, it's just distilled from the lees. So they take all the yeast after fermenting wine, pile it into a still, boil off all the water, and then start collecting at about 108 Celsius and above. And it's basically the essence of the yeast and cognac. And I think this is an ingredient more people should be using in everything they're making, whether it's non-alcoholic or alcoholic. It's just a wonderful smell, especially if you like brandy. Now, rose oil, you'll see show up, and a bunch of other florals like violet. Rose oil is really expensive right now, so a bottle like this can run you $80. So if you want to substitute, you can use rose geranium, and it's grass as well. So it's similar to rose, slightly different, but cheaper and still works. Next, we will look at orris. That's another floral. So I think I got orris in 2 different yeah, this is an absolute, and this is a orris isolate. So they both work. They both have a violet aroma. They're used in perfume as a fixative, and so they can be helpful in fixing a flavor. Look up in the perfume world if you don't know what a fixative is, but it gives flavors length and staying power. Next, we're looking at neroli, and this is orange flower distillate, so another floral. And this one's found a lot in different ingredients, in Coca-Cola, in bitters, liqueurs, but it is expensive. So you can buy nerol, which is kind of a a chemically made one, though it's the same natural compound as this, but it's an isolate. And if you don't want to use that, you can use petite grain. It's a reasonable substitute for it, much cheaper, much more widely available. And sometimes nerol can be mixed with geranol to kind of round out the flavors a bit. But again, another floral compound that you can use if you choose to do so. Orange oil I've only found in one recipe and maybe two. And then clove oil shows up in a couple of them. Clove's very potent, so you'd only use this at one drop. It will dominate a flavor if you use too much of it. Now gentian, you can, if you find this not bitter enough, or when you make this that it's not bitter enough, you can add a little gentian. Now there are 3 esters here, ethyl butyrate and ethyl acetate. So actually 2 esters. So this is a big bottle of ethyl acetate. If people are having a hard time finding it, if for some reason it doesn't seem to be widely available, it's very common in distilled products and wine. It's probably the most common ester in wine, distilled spirits, can even show up in beer. But the interesting one that I've come across, it's only in one recipe, but it's ethyl butyrate. So if you've ever had a chartreuse swizzle, it has pineapple juice in it. And when I saw this recipe, I wonder if somebody had the ability to smell the ethyl butyrate in this. I don't think monks use any or isolated compounds. I suspect they use all these and distill them. But there may be an element where this does exist in it, because chartreuse swizzles are fantastic and they do have that pineapple. So if you're planning on making a chartreuse swizzle, you might want to add a little ethyl butyrate. And that recipe will be on my Patreon page, the one with so it's this one here. It's a little bit more complex, but it's got a few more ingredients, and it does have some of the esters in it. So it makes it kind of a more possibly fruity. You can use some coriander in there. Ionone, some of the recipes calls for violet. There's lots of florals for some reason in this, but ionone has that kind of violet. And I used it in a couple other recipes, so you might have it lying around. So feel free to add a drop of that to your recipe. One ingredient I think would work well, if I've heard people say chartreuse, especially green chartreuse, can be defined as a flavor of green. It's that vegetal flavor. So the parent of chartreuse was called Elixir Vegetal, and it does have that kind of vegetal green. But this is hexanol 3-cis, or 3-cis hexanol, and it's kind of actually a grassy aroma. And a single drop I could see adding very much the grass note that you might find in that, or that green note. But this actually smells like kind of like fresh cut grass, and it's quite a pleasant smell. But again, when you're using 1 drop and you got 4 mils, that's 80 drops worth, so it will last a long time. Now, the one thing that you shouldn't be using, if I can find it here, calamus oil. So you'll see calamus show up a lot in these recipes. It's got a compound in it called azarone. It's a cancer-causing one. Calamus is not really considered grass, though it is grandfathered in for liqueurs and liquors that have this prior to the grass system, or the FEMA grass system coming into place back in the 1960s. So there are still things out there with calamus, probably like Fernet and a couple other of the vintage Amari. So it may actually have it, but be careful using it. You probably shouldn't, but it is an oddly pleasant aroma that I could see it being used in this, quite possibly. I leave it up to you, but if you're serving it to other people, might not want to. So let's assemble the chartreuse recipe and see how it comes out. The first thing I recommend doing is putting together your simple syrup. And this is 333 grams of sugar and 280 mils of water. Now, just for ease, I'm just going to mix this up into a beaker and then pour it in here. So now we'll get this stirring while we start assembling our flavor compounds. Now you're going to need 750 mils of 95% ethanol, so Everclear, or in my case I don't have Everclear, but I do have a still, so I am going to be using some Hart-cut Riesling. It's probably about 80%, so you don't necessarily need 95%, though it does get the ABV up to 55. This might be around 50, but it's still going to be perfectly fine for the amount of oils we're using. Again, use what you have. I've noticed that a lot of states and provinces and countries don't sell 95, so use what you have. Even vodka would probably work, though I wouldn't add the water. I would just do all straight vodka and dissolve the sugar in the vodka. Don't add extra water. If you have questions about all of this, what you can and can't use, post those over on Patreon and I will try to get you an answer. Anyway, what we're going to start doing now is measuring out our oils. Now, you do want to measure them out and use droppers. A lot of these are going to be single drops. Do not try to add a drop into there. You're going to mess it up. 2 drops are going to come out. It's just going to lead to a lot of mistakes. The best thing to do is take a little beaker and then some alcohol. Put 1 drop in the beaker. When you get it right, take a little bit of alcohol with this, rinse it, and then pour that into there. Rinse it a second time, pour it into there. And then work your way through these until you've done it properly. Again, 1 drop and a few mils of alcohol will work. So I've measured out 250 here, and then I will be adding another 500 to this. So for now, I just need 250 mils, whatever. Just stick to 750 mils of alcohol. So let's get started. I'll just kind of clear this up so you can see what I am doing. And basically, I'm just following that recipe I showed you earlier. And I have my cheat sheet here, but we're going to add 4 drops of peppermint oil. And as you can see, I probably already messed that up. I think I probably got 5. Sometimes it's hard to tell. So we do that again, and we do it slower. And then dispose of those. Don't reuse a pipette. It will cause cross-contamination. Take a little bit of this. And because it's 95%, it's going to dissolve everything fine. So that's our peppermint. Next on the list is angelica root, and we're going to need 2 drops of this. Now this has a built-in dropper. And you can see it goes slightly cloudy. That will clear up once you get it all dissolved in there. And you can do 2 rinses. 3 rinses is actually better and probably get 99%, but I just generally have a couple. As long as I don't make a mistake, I can just keep using the same beaker. However, if I make a mistake, I always have a few backups. The next one is lemon balm. And we're going to need 1 drop of this. And if you find any sticking on the bottom, sometimes some of the oils are quite viscous, just give it a couple rinses and mix it around. It will dissolve, and then you'll be good. So that's lemon balm. Next is hyssop. 1 drop of that. Next on the list is cinnamon. So this is true cinnamon bark oil, and we need 1 drop. Now you may be thinking that this is a very small amount of oil in a liter, but this is actually a perfect example of how much flavor compounds are in things. This is going to add up to maybe 500 parts per million of total flavor, and each one of these is going to be less than 40 milligrams in the formula, except for maybe the peppermint and the angelica. This one will be about 80, and this one will be about 120 parts per million, but all the rest are below 50, and it's still, going to have a lot of flavor in it, though you're only using single drops. If you really want to learn more about all that, I do have an online course for working with small amounts of flavors, and we get into micropipettes and other tools that make this easier. So feel free to check that out if you're interested. Now the next one is nutmeg, and again, 1 drop. Sometimes you just got to give this a mix up, get the kind of sugar moving in there. And next is fennel. Now this is replacing the sassafras, and again, 1 drop. Next on the list is sandalwood, and again, 1 drop. Next on the list is lemon oil. I don't have lemon thyme, so I'm just going to do 1 drop of lemon oil, 1 drop of thyme, and hope that works out. And finally, this isn't on that recipe, but a musky note is important to this. So I'm going to use ambrette, but I find you're going to find 1 drop of this is too strong, so I'm going to dilute it. I'm going to use 1/4 of a drop. And the way you do 1/4 of a drop is basically you're going to put 1 drop in. Then you're going to add 3 drops. Now, it seems like a very small amount, but you're actually going to be able to do this. Inhale it. And that's good. If you got 2 drops in, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But now we have 1/4 drop of ambrette in there. And now we just have to get all this dissolved. So this will take a couple minutes, but I'm going to add my alcohol now. So I'm going to add 500 mils of this. You can use graduated cylinders if you want. For flavor profiling, you can use a beaker. And then my final 250 mils of alcohol. Now, if you pre-dissolved you made basically your simple syrup with your sugar and your water, this would probably go a little bit quicker, but I just wanted to show you the steps. So I'm gonna let this dissolve and turn into our chartreuse, and then we will do a tasting. So once the sugar is dissolved, you're gonna have a perfectly clear solution. The quality of your alcohol is going to matter on this, so if you're using something really coarse, it's gonna show through when you're using that much alcohol. So using like a hard cut brandy, high proof, is actually a decent idea. Now I'm just gonna add a little bit of this and give it a taste. Now, the mint is a bit too much in this, so I would definitely cut the mint back by half. And so I'll make that modification, or I'll make notes of that on the Patreon page. But beyond that, other than the mint being overpowering at 4 drops, 2 drops, maybe even 1 drop might be good. It's still a decent, starting point. You do get some of that herbal nature, you do get a little bit of that muskiness. Let me just try beside that. So the difference is this one is much smoother. The quality of alcohol doesn't have that burn that you get with higher proof stuff. So this would need, this is a single distilled Riesling. And so it'd probably need double distilled or more, but a really clean alcohol. Though the burn's not unpleasant, the burn is stronger in this version. Now the thing this is missing is that green vegetal flavor that most people associate chartreuse with. But other than that, there's some similarity, but that back of your throat kind of green flavor is not fully pronounced. This isn't bad, actually. This is a decent liqueur, other than that the mint's way too strong. But a little bit of tweaking, and if you could really get that vegetal flavor into this, then you'd be much, much closer. Now, I've been working on a formula, and I'm gonna still work on the formula some more. I will publish it as a recipe sheet on Patreon once I've kind of dialed it in. But this is not a bad liqueur to start. So again, cut back on the mint, maybe increase the Angelica, and probably a little bit of wormwood, and maybe a couple other green elements would really help this. But that's basically it. So that's your starting point for chartreuse. If If you want to look at all 24 plus recipes, head on over to Patreon. Your support is appreciated over there. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.